Quita Highsmith is the VP of Population Health at Genentech. But more importantly, she's a friend of the MM+M podcast. Highsmith first appeared on the show for an interview in late October 2020, more than 6 months into the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. In her capacity as Chief Diversity Officer, she spoke with our old friend Mark Iskowitz about the biotech's efforts to recruit and instill more trust among underserved and medically disenfranchised patients. Highsmith returned to the show in May 2023 to discuss the drug maker's progress and ongoing challenges on the road to DEI. She discussed the long journey towards addressing the impact of health inequities, as well as how Genentech is fostering more diversity in society through steady investments and partnerships. Now she's back on the pod to talk about Genentech's All Eyes on DME campaign, which features comedian Damon Wayans. Launched this spring, All Eyes on DME is the drug maker's pop culture-focused way to talk about a condition in diabetic macular edema that is both overlooked and disproportionately impacts patients of color. Additionally, Highsmith reflects on her decades of working in healthcare and why the work doesn't stop for her or Genentech. And for our trends segment, we're talking with our editor-at-large Steve Madden about his time in Las Vegas, where he covered the Enhanced Games. He also underlines what it all means for medical marketers. Quita, thank you so much for being on the show. It's always great to have people that have been on the show come back, and there's plenty I want to talk about, but obviously the big focus is recently Genentech rolling out the All Eyes on DME campaign with Damon Wayans. Want to get into all of that, but how about we just start for those in the audience who may not be aware of what DME is? Can you give them a little refresher on that?
Well, thanks, Jack, for having me back. I'm so excited to be here. And we are very excited to share about our campaign on All Eyes on DME. And DME is really known as diabetic macular edema. And it is an eye disease that people with diabetes have. And it often causes blindness. And so this is an opportunity for us to be able to have real conversations with people living with diabetes to bring to attention about diabetic macular edema, which oftentimes impacts people of color who are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop significant vision conditions from diabetes.
And there's so much I want to be able to unpack there, obviously kind of taking I don't want to say a funny angle with it, but certainly a more humorous approach. How did Damon get involved?
Well, one of the things that we wanted to do when it comes to DME is we wanted to kind of break through the noise. And many times people with diabetes, people talk about diabetes. They're talking about A1C. They're talking about the loss of limbs, and they're talking about other things. And so often vision is not part of the equation. And so we wanted to have a real opportunity to bring awareness to that. You have to pay attention to vision loss. And so we were able to team up with Damon, who has type 2 diabetes. And we wanted to have someone who could bring attention to the fact that diabetic macular edema is a serious condition. It's often overlooked. And it's often overlooked in underrepresented populations. And so having someone who could make it kind of funny to say, okay, I've got type 2 diabetes. I'm often overlooked. And here's a condition that you should be thinking about. So in collaboration with Damon, we were able to bring together this campaign, All Eyes on DME. And he's just been the perfect spokesperson to bring some levity and to help us elevate the conversation.
I want to ask you a question about what it's like working with him and, a pretty well-renowned comedian. But just going back to the fact that DME, like you said, it has a disproportionate impact on underserved communities. What's something that people maybe don't fully understand about DME or are surprised to learn when they get more exposure to it?
I think one of the things that people are surprised, the numbers are clear. DME currently affects 750,000 Americans. It's the leading cause of vision loss among people with diabetes. And this burden is not shared equally. Black and Hispanic, Latino adults are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop DME compared to other communities. And despite this higher risk, those same communities often face some of the largest barriers to screening. And that's what we really want. We want people to get screened so that they can have effective treatment, which is why we're focusing on the need for early screening so that people can get interventions so that they don't potentially end up blind. And we don't want to have people lose their sight. It's an urgent issue.
Yeah, it's taking that proactive action. So then it's not when something has gone so cataclysmically wrong, you're trying to,
absolutely
scrape it all together. I want to ask too, because you did this in partnership with Damon and also with Diatribe. Can you talk a little bit about that organization, how they came to be involved in this?
Anytime that we can work with a patient advocate organization, it's really exciting because when you're able to work with patient advocate organizations, these are folks that are really part of the community, that really understand representation, that are having real conversations with patients, and they understand the day-to-day experiences that patients have. They help us build trust. We're with a biotech company. I wouldn't say we're the most trusted organization out there, but when you work with an organization like Diatribe that is community-based, that lives and breathes advocacy for patients, being able to have them as part of the engagement, it really allows people to see themselves. It allows us to have a different level of conversation. It allows people to be able to kind of take charge of their health, it helps them be able to want to go to their doctor, to be able to have the conversation. And we love working with Diatribe and other patient advocate organizations.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question there too, because you talk about obviously the gap in terms of people's trust with biotechs and pharma companies, and it's something obviously we really dive into as part of our coverage area. I wonder too what that's like being able to utilize somebody like Damon, where people may not, so maybe they don't have a one-to-one relationship with Genentech, but they've seen his stand-up, they've seen his movies and stuff. I imagine that helps you having that sort of messenger be able to explore a topic like this.
Absolutely. Being able to partner with someone like Damon Wayans, who is he's from a well-known family. So not only is he well-known, but his whole family is well-known. And so when we're able to partner with really an authentic personality, to really be able to have that type of partnership, it shows a community that we're listening, right? That we are showing up authentically, that we are engaging, and that we're coming to the community with mutual respect, that we're understanding how people think and act and how they want to engage. And, for us being able, and he's so funny, right? He can take the simplest topic and really bring out a connection with people. We had an event, and the crowd was so engaged, and he was authentically telling his story that both sides of his family have diabetes. And so many people in the audience could relate to that. And he was also sharing that they didn't want to talk about it. And so when people don't want to talk about it, you're not going to be able to get the information that you need to be able to make a better decision, to have a better outcome. And so I really believe that by having a partnership with him, that we're out here changing lives, because he is going to help people identify that there could potentially be opportunities for them to go get that health screening, to ensure that the providers, the healthcare organizations are not missing that eye screening, so that any patient that potentially has diabetes is getting that eye screening so that they can see for themselves whether or not they're on a path to diabetic macular edema. And if they are, they can get something done and do something about it.
Absolutely. It's like we were talking about earlier, just having that first step to be able to take some sort of action, be able to see a specialist, be able to get on a treatment is so key in these situations. It's great that you have a messenger that's able to relay that in a way that's much more approachable than maybe what we see around traditional medical marketing. I have one more question about the campaign, then I had a couple questions just about your own leadership journey and stuff. Again, just from having you been on the show here, but it's always interesting whenever we cover these campaigns that are more like screening focused and kind of more top of the funnel stuff, just from an activation perspective. Like, what does success look like? Like, if we were to talk in 6 months, a year from now, how would you be able to look back on this and say, this actually worked to our expectations?
Well, one of the things we would love for people to go to the All Eyes on DME.com campaign. On this campaign, we have resource library for patient resources, caregiver resources, where there's the fact sheet. So you don't have to remember. There is a downloadable fact sheet on patient resources, patient discussion guides, because, 90% of what people remember when they leave the doctor is zero. And so these are some discussion guides so people don't have to remember. They can download these tools. They can go to the doctor's office. They can ask questions. Their caregiver can download tools. They can ask questions so that when they're in the doctor's office, they can say, have I been screened for this? Is this a possibility that this is something that I might have? And if I do have, what's the next step? How can I get treated? How can I get screened? What are my options? So ideally, in 6 months, our website would be used. People will take action, and we will have prevented patients from losing their sight.
And we'll be sure to link to that in the show notes for anybody that's listening here that wants to learn more or might, be looking for screening opportunities there. So appreciate you being able to shout that out. I was also, like I said, I was looking back at our previous conversations. You spoke with Mark Iskowitz when he was here back in the fall of 2020. We had talked.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
I know. And I was looking back, we had talked about 3 years ago around this time. And so it's kind of like our 3-year check-in with you. But I'm really curious, like all of the conversations that we've had have focused around, the work that you've done in terms of being able to do outreach with underrepresented patient populations, advocating for DEI. And that has changed so much over the course of the past 6 years, 3 years. I'm curious just what you make of that evolution. In some ways, there's been a kind of corporate abandonment. In some ways, other organizations have leaned in. I would say Genentech's been more on that side. What do you make of that dynamic over the years?
Well, first of all, we survived COVID.
We're on the other side of it.
We're on the other side. I think of life as pre-COVID, post-COVID. So we're in our post-COVID world. And I'm excited. I feel like for us at Genentech, we've started Population Health, our center of excellence, and I'm really excited about it because it's really our opportunity to mobilize our teams to think about new initiatives such as All Eyes on DME, where we're thinking about community-based partnerships, where we're thinking about how can we do more to participate in the future of healthcare. How can we be in community and shape it? When we think about rural America, 61 million people live in rural America, and we want to make sure that when we're engaging, we're not only thinking about rural America, we're thinking about urban America, we're thinking about working America, we're thinking about veterans. And so our vision is, how do we ensure we get our transformation medicines to more patients in more communities? And we think about, how do we do that? We've got to combine our science, our data, our policy, deep community partnerships to close care gaps and expand access for our medicines to reach more patients in more communities. And I'm excited about how Genentech is thinking about the possibilities to mobilize our people and accelerate new opportunities and new initiatives. And think boldly, like this initiative with Damon. Who would have thought that, bringing in a comedian to talk about a serious condition like diabetic macular edema would be something on the horizon. But as an industry, we have to be thinking broader. We have to be thinking bigger. We have to be thinking about new ways to break through, right? Because there's so much noise in the ether, right? We've got social media. We've just got the world around us. And if we want patients to be able to hear us, then we've got to be able to think more broadly about reaching patients where they are.
No, and I think that of the companies that we've covered over the years, I think that yours has always done a very interesting way in terms of being able to go about that. And I would hope that your peers in our audience take that to heart in terms of like, yeah, think creatively, think outside the box and take action that way. I wanted to also ask you too, like, you know, you've been somebody that's been around the industry for a number of years and have seen all these different evolutions, the pre-COVID, post-COVID you talk about, and all these other treatments and ways that you communicate with patients and stuff. If you could go back to when you started your career in healthcare, knowing what you know now, what would you impart to your younger self? What would you have said?
I would say be authentic. One of the things that is important for me is, you know, when you're at corporate America, you want to think, act, look like the leadership. And what I have found, I have been most successful when I have been my authentic self. Be able to bring my ideas forward, not be afraid, not get small, but to, you know, when you see something, say something. And I think that is when we drive innovation, is when we raise our hand and when we say, you know, this is a solution that I see, and not be afraid, because maybe you're not the most senior person in the room, but oftentimes the voices that are sitting around the table have some of the best ideas. And so I would say to my younger self, go ahead, make the statement, raise your hand, volunteer, and you'd be surprised that that idea might be the one that makes it to the top.
I think that's very sage advice, not only for your younger self, but obviously for those who might be more junior in our audience who are looking for, hey, how do I make it and climb up the corporate ladder or take that advancement in my career and stuff. So I really appreciate you highlighting that for us. It's great to have you on the show. Hopefully it won't be another 3 years before we have you back on here, but I want to give you the parting word in case there's anything about this campaign, about what you're seeing in the industry that you want to leave our audience with.
You know, one of the things that I think right now, in America that I do want to leave is, I think we right now in America, I think all of us in our industry, we have to champion health literacy. One of the things that COVID advanced is in the U.S., 54% of U.S. adults read below a sixth grade level. 40 to 80% of the medical information patients receive is forgotten immediately. 9 out of 10 U.S. adults struggle with health literacy. And so as we think about our campaigns, a therapy no one understands cannot change lives, no matter how innovative it is. And so all of us have an obligation to do something about it. And so for us at Genentech, we're going to be championing health literacy. It is going to be a core focus of mine and Genentech's for population health, because we want to ensure that patients have a better understanding of their health, of the healthcare system, that they feel more confident in making informed decisions. And I really do feel like the more that, and I feel like podcasts like this are part of championing health literacy, ensuring patients understand diseases, understand how to advocate for themselves so that they can have better outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it ties in with something that I get on my high horse about in terms of like media literacy. I think the two go hand in hand. And so
Yes.
if there's a better way we can improve both of those, I think we're all the better for it.
Absolutely. That's speak the truth.
I always try to. Quita, really appreciate you being on the podcast here. Again, it won't be 3 years before the next time. It will make
All right,
it much
let me know
sooner
when I can come back.
Absolutely. You've always got something great to say. Thank you for coming on this episode. While the rest of us were here on the East Coast dealing with the typically rainy Memorial Day weekend, that was not the case for one Steve Madden, who was over in Viva Las Vegas. Madden, why don't you talk to us first about the weather just so we can feel more FOMO and then we can actually get into the event. What was it like in Vegas in late May?
It was 97 degrees not a cloud in the sky. Great weather if you want to just hang out in a casino, or if you've got a spot by the pool with an umbrella. Not so great if you are, for example, a weightlifter not used to competing outside and having to deal with bars that heat up in the sun.
It's almost like that's a problem. We'll get into all of the different stuff that you got to see, but for those in our audience who may not have been reading your coverage that's on the website, and we've been featuring it in the newsletter, you were on hand for the enhanced games, which are obviously this very controversial, but also interesting idea in terms of a sporting competition and kind of mixing into our world as it relates to the peptides craze and everything. Give just kind of a snapshot for those who may be unfamiliar with what the enhanced games are, and then we can actually go into your experience there.
So the enhanced games are a competition that involve three sports: weightlifting, technically four sports: weightlifting, strongman, which is different from weightlifting, swimming, and track and field. And what makes these things unique is that the athletes are allowed to use performance enhancing drugs, which are banned in banned by international governing bodies and in virtually every other sport. So that was where the controversy comes in. It's a very, very polarizing topic. But I don't think that it should be polarizing or controversial, because this thing is what it is. It's completely different, right? This isn't the Olympics. The Olympics says you can't use drugs, period, right? And they spend a fortune and a lot of time and effort, and athletes have to put up with a lot of hassle to compete drug free, right? These guys have said, look, not only can you take performance enhancing drugs, we're going to give them to you as part of a controlled study, because in reality, performance enhancing drugs really haven't been subject to, or a protocol to improve an athlete's performance hasn't been studied scientifically. And this was most of the athletes were part of a study that was IRB approved, right? So it's legit. And it's going to be interesting to see what the medical results are. As far as the athletic results go, there was all this hype about how there's going to be world records and all this sort of stuff. And actually they would never be included as world records. They'd be just asterisks to a fare thee well, because of the PEDs involved. But there was only one world record set in the pool. To me, the most interesting thing was, in addition to being a completely different kind of athletic event, the enhanced games are a giant content marketing engine for Enhanced, which is a company that right now sells peptides and hormone replacement therapies. It's like Roe on steroids, you might say.
I want to ask a follow-up question before tossing over to Bella, because I know she has some questions about Enhanced itself, but you've obviously used to write for Sports Illustrated, used to be the editor-in-chief of Bicycling Magazine. You've covered major sporting events going back decades. You've also been in the content marketing world of things. So being at that intersection, great to have you there. But what did you make of that? Because I think when we go to different things, when I went to South by, when we're sending Lesha to ASCO and stuff like that, it's one thing that's very cut and dry, but the thing that you were covering was so many different intersections for our industry. I'm curious what you made of that on the whole, because there's a lot of bluster and a lot of hype. There's a lot of condemnation, but there's also, to your point, a lot of stuff that's fairly interesting and could be on the up and up. What did you make of it on the whole?
I had to keep reminding myself that I was there for MM+M, because kind of the sports reporter in me kicked in. And I couldn't help asking. And I'm a swimmer and a personal trainer, and I couldn't help but geeking out and asking athletes these questions. Like, I was just so excited to talk, like almost fanboying with Cody Miller about, like, now that you're much stronger, has it affected your technique in the breaststroke and stuff like that? MM+M audience doesn't care about that. So I had to keep reminding myself, like, let's ask him about, like, who do you follow online and, that kind of stuff. So that was kind of cool. But what was really interesting, and Max Martin, the CEO of Enhanced, actually pointed this out in a press conference, and you could see it at the events. I can't think of too many other events that have attracted MM+M, MIT's Tech Review, Wired, Men's Health, AFP, the BBC. It was just, it like all these different worlds collided in these games because of what they were doing. So, and as far as just like sheer spectacle goes, I mean, these guys just knocked it out of the park. I for one wouldn't hold an elite athletic competition in a parking lot in Las Vegas in May, but I understand there may have been some challenges, getting a venue that quickly. But the venue itself was really impressive. It was 2,500 seat stadium with a temporary 50-meter pool that was four lanes, 8 feet deep uniform, 100-meter competition track, and a weightlifting platform. So all of that was, as far as spectacle goes, really impressive. As far as a medical marketing content creation platform goes, they could probably do this a lot cheaper than they did. But I think for the kickoff, having this massive event, I mean, the Killers would, the Killers played at the end of the games, and there was a party in a nightclub and all this kind of stuff. So it was completely over the top. I think they can probably, if they're looking to generate social media content, can do it a lot more cheaply. But for the first effort, they probably felt it was necessary.
We'll get that nightclub reporting on our Patreon for anyone that's interested. We'll throw that up behind a paywall. I want to throw it over to Bella, though, because you pointed something out interesting to me before we got on here, which is that for all the media coverage, and again, not only that we were providing, but obviously mainstream publications that Madden pointed out, Enhanced certainly got a lot of attention, but it's been a rough start to the week.
Yeah, I saw just before we jumped on here that their stock prices fell. Share prices were down 40% today.
Yeah.
Which is, I think I read the lowest or the biggest fall since they went public. So I'm curious, Madden, two things. One, why that might be, if it has anything to do with only one record being set. And sort of I feel like the coverage I've read has focused a lot on how like athletes who are competing clean, turned out really, really well. Even in competition with people who are using the PEDs. And two, like whether you think this is, I think in some of your reporting and elsewhere, like there was some sentiment among the leaders of the company that they want this to reach across the barrier to not just elite athletes, but everyday people. And whether you think that was successful out of this, like whether you think that'll be successful out of these games or not. Because like you said, it was pretty over the top showing. I don't know that I see myself in that of a weightlifter lifting a thoroughbred, I think you said.
Yeah, they were trying to, Thor and Moose were trying to deadlift 1,100 pounds. And
not my plan tomorrow, but
and it didn't work. It's a thoroughbred horse, a polar bear, a grand piano, or 11 couches, if you're trying to figure out what 1,100 pounds is. My guess, I'm not a stock analyst, so I can't say for sure, but my hunch is that they were hanging so much on setting world records, and again, world bests, right? Let's call them what they are. They're not going to be counted as world records. And they only got one, right? So there's that. 3 of the events were won by athletes who were competing clean. Hunter Armstrong won in the pool. Fred Curley won on the track. And the women's 100-meter dash was run by a woman who was competing clean. And I think that runs counter to the narrative that they had created or the hype that they had created going into it. For a medical marketer, though, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, all right, so they didn't set a whole bunch of world records. They didn't exactly have the A-list of athletes, right? I mean, Katie Ledecky was not there. An A-list athlete who can support herself with the sport, right? And that's like a multiple gold medal winners, like swimmers, runners who have won multiple gold medals. They can support themselves. They've got deals with shoe companies, and maybe some other companies that can, allow them to train full time. I talked with one sprinter, a woman in the 100, who came out of retirement, having been retired for 2 years, came out of retirement to do this. She was lured by A, the salary that the Enhanced Games was paying, and B, just the urge to compete again. But she worked all these different jobs while she was running, right? Mm-hmm. She was a personal trainer, a caterer, a personal chef, and a high school track coach. So, for an athlete who's doing all these hustles and trying to be an elite athlete at the same time, when Enhanced comes along and says, hey, we'll pay you a 6-figure salary. Shane Ryan, the swimmer, told me that he made more money this year than he'd made in the last 3 years combined. That's a pretty powerful draw. But someone like, say, Katie Ledecky, or Ry Benjamin or Grant Holloway, they have a lot to lose by competing in the Enhanced Games just because they're kind of tainted, right? But from a medical marketer's point of view, to me, mm-hmm. and as an amateur athlete myself, the thing that I found most compelling and most interesting was the fact that several athletes who had been retired for several years and were in their mid-30s went on the Enhanced protocol and set personal bests, right? Megan Romano, 35-year-old swimmer, never made it to the Olympics, is on a relay team that still holds an American record, but she never made it to the Olympics, right? She retired more than 10 years ago and hadn't been in a pool to seriously train since then. She signs with Enhanced, gets a salary, goes on the protocol, swims faster at age 35 than she ever had before, right? So it's not a world record, but it's a personal best. And if you're, a 62-year-old guy with a job and some side hustles, and you try and swim and compete in other stuff, and all of a sudden you look at this and you say, I take this stuff and I can swim faster than I ever had. Mark me down as curious. So, I don't know if Enhanced is listening to this podcast, but you guys have a really powerful story to tell in peptides. You just have to be able to tell it with, pointing toward the legal substances, not the stuff that everyday, folks like me can't get their hands on.
And I guess that's where I have a follow-up question for you is we're talking about one company in this way where it's Enhanced, but obviously for the sake of our audience, there are so many of these big pharma and biotechs that are out there that are operating in this space. And I'm curious, I guess what you would say to them in terms of when they're communicating with their clients, if we're talking about agency people or even brand side marketers, because there is an opportunity here that whenever there's a conversation about if we have a celebrity lead this campaign, I don't know that a lot of hearts and minds were changed when Bon Jovi was out there hawking Nurtec or whatever it was. I don't think that a lot of people, when they see Lady Gaga, and that was actually Nurtec, it's always different when it's a patient advocate and stuff. But when, to your point, people see, I'm able to compete better, harder, have a better well-being decades out of my prime by using this, and it's being studied and it's being validated and stuff like that. I would think that if I was a company, I would want to be building up that trust and that good graces with potential consumers. But I'm curious if that's the vantage point that you took on it.
I mean, it's the tripwire, right? Pharma is incredibly risk averse anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So, and even in the best of times, even when they do things like, stop pandemics dead in their tracks, they're still not willing to kind of come out and say, hey, listen, this is what we do. Lilly is getting there with some of its recent campaigns, right? And look, I don't think you'll ever see the day when EPO is a blood booster. It increases red blood cell volume. And it's a really powerful performance enhancer. It's the thing that cyclists and cross-country skiers abused, really, like in the Tour de France scandals in the early part of the century. It increases hematocrit, right? So your red blood cell volume, and therefore your oxygen carrying capacity is increased. You're never going to see the day when that is prescribed off label. What it was created for was anemic cancer patients who were anemic after chemotherapy, right? And then some genius figured out, like, hey, if it'll help a cancer patient, it could help me, win the Tour de France or an Olympic gold medal in cross country skiing. So you're never going to see that. I can't imagine any responsible physician or any sane pharmaceutical company saying, like Amgen saying, hey, we should market this for amateur athletes. I just don't see it. Same with human growth hormone, which, the physiques that were on display at this thing were astonishing. I mentioned in the piece that, swimmers, Olympic swimmers, elite swimmers get really big and strong and bulky, and you look at their chest and shoulders and you're like, wow, look at those people. They're monsters. But they're not ripped. They tend to have a layer of subcutaneous fat that physiologists think is a result of spending so much time in colder water to train. These guys were jacked. I mean, jacked. Like, sign me up, kind of jacked. That's probably a result of both anabolic steroids and human growth hormone. And I'm not going to get either one of those, nor do I want them. Like, I'd rather swim slower or less far and not die early because of cardiac arrest, or develop the kind of ridge that you get from abusing human growth hormone. But there is a precursor to HGH, a peptide, sermorelin, I might be saying that wrong, that is available. And again, like I said, I'm curious.
What was the line that you liked in the story that you brought up earlier today? Is it slab of a man?
A bald slab of a man or something.
Yeah, those lifters, the strong men, Moose and Thor, they were giant. Mitchell Hooper, Canadian strongman, super interesting guy, right? And a kinesiologist and a therapist. So this guy has an intimate knowledge of what he's doing to his body. He started his athletic career as a marathoner, of all things. And now he's a 335 pound, strongman who can't wait to get back to marathoning so he can get his weight down and his VO2 max up and not have to explain to his children why he eats 10 times a day. So that's the other thing about this. These athletes are not dupes. They're not just like sitting there saying like, sure, doc, top me off. They knew exactly what was going on. We're keen, like Shane Ryan, the 3-time Olympian for Ireland, talked super knowledgeably about his own performance. And look, these people are professional athletes, right? This is how they make their living. This is how they feed their families. That's really important. This is how they feed their families. They're not going to just like dump stuff in. And that's the thing about the enhanced games, why I don't have a beef with it like a lot of purists do, like a lot of the sports reporters that I was talking to this weekend do, because it is what it is. It's not the Olympics. They're saying you can take this stuff if you want. And anytime I asked any of the athletes, like, hey, who do you follow online, like for advice? They rolled their eyes at me. They're like, what, are you kidding? You think I'm going to pay attention to some influencer? I'm a professional athlete. I'm not just going to dump anything in. They all seem to listen to Joe Rogan, but that's probably more for entertainment than anything else.
But that's where I kind of want to be able to loop the conversation. It goes back to something that Bella brought up in a discussion that we had offline, but also earlier in this conversation about like, if the end goal for a company like Enhanced is that we want to make these peptides popular and available and readily accessible to Joe Schmo in middle America, and they don't take as much in terms of looking at what the side effects are, what, like, you know, I think that's been kind of the thing that we've learned throughout this GLP-1 craze, is that people just want it like, yep, just give it to me in the pill or just give it to me in the shot. And I don't have to do, like, when you talk about peptides, and, you know, I can only speak from my own layman's experience, like people just don't, they're not professional athletes. They don't always think about what they're putting in their body. They want the quick, simple solution, and then you deal with any of the other stuff afterwards. I guess what I'm trying to get to is like, what what has to happen in that next evolution, or what part of the narrative has to be corrected there? Because I think that there could be a benefit to making these things more readily available and accessible across the country, with a big but. The average consumer, and we've seen in all the different studies and reports that we follow, just doesn't have that sort of health literacy. And that would be my concern about, popularizing it, is, they do listen to influencers. They're not professional athletes. They do take influencers' advice, as Bella has reported recently. Where does the peptide curiosity go from here to actually become something tangible? And I think about it with peptides as the microcosm, but like, it's obviously, it can apply to so many different treatments and medications that are out there.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with you that people are just willing to take stuff and not ask questions about it. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, where do you think vaccine resistance comes from? Right. And
I think it differs across different treatments and medications, but I think your point's well taken.
So
can I interject with a additive question?
Sure.
As if that topic wasn't
as if I wasn't meandering enough.
I think when I'm hearing you talk about that, Jack, and it sort of feels like a question of holistic health, like things that are for holistic health. And I'm putting GLP-1s in that category because it's weight loss, and weight loss affects one's holistic health, versus like things that are meant to improve like one aspect of someone's life, like a performance enhancing drug, like peptides, which are how they've, by and large been marketed now. I sort of see those as different things, and maybe that, I don't know if that sort of tracks with what you were saying or not, but.
So one thing about this is that it intersects with the longevity movement, right? Mm-hmm. And the longevity movement, to me, I'm speaking personally, I'm not speaking for MM+M, and I'm certainly not trying to seems kind of nuts to me, right? There were people at the Enhanced Games who were longevity influencers who were walking around with umbrellas, and they looked like vampires, because I guess part of longevity is like not getting any natural vitamin D via sunlight. Right?
You didn't see Brian Johnson there?
I didn't mention any names.
He pleads the fifth on that.
So one of the side effects of GLP-1s is loss of muscle mass, mm-hmm. right? Loss of muscle mass is a really serious problem for older people. And I'm speaking as an older person, right? So you really need to maintain muscle mass. If the people currently working wonders with GLP-1s can't figure out a way to create a version of a GLP-1 or an iteration of it, more to the point, that can prevent muscle mass, then maybe you wouldn't need to take something like a human growth hormone precursor, right? And one of the points, and I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with Max Martin on all of this stuff, is like, the thing about medicine as we currently practice it is, come see me when you're sick and we'll fix what's wrong. What these guys are saying that they're trying to do is, let's get you to the point where you don't get sick, right? Where you don't lose bone density and risk falling because your hip broke. But I mean, your point is well taken too, Jack. It's like, how much do these people who are not professional athletes know? And are they just willing to take stuff willy-nilly? I can't answer that question because, not to be a libertarian, but it is about personal choice. And if you choose to take this stuff, then it's incumbent on you to understand the effect that it's going to have on your body.
I totally get that. And it's one of the things, I guess, to kind of bring this conversation to a close, like, you talk about it intersecting with the longevity thing when you were talking about it, where we want to get away from sick care. Like, I used to cover hospitals, and people always talk about, we got to get more towards preventative health. We got to be talking about the social determinants of health. We got to be talking about all these things that happen that ultimately result in people having chronic illnesses, getting sick, and the weight that it has on our sick care system. So I totally get that. I still remain a little hesitant that maybe this is the way that we're going to get there, but the messaging at least clicks. And I think that's ultimately why we had you on the ground there too, is it's like, there is the healthcare angle, but then there's also the messaging part that clearly these companies that we cover just haven't been on top of enough. And that's where you get players like that entering the space and being able to get a lot of people to attend?
Look, if I think there's a sweet spot here, I mean, the sweet spot is for older people, right? It's like aim the messaging at older people who can like recover or regain some of the vitality, some of the stoke that they've lost. But it also allows you to keep doing the stuff, that keeps you healthy. But I'm just speaking personally. I love exercising. I love to swim. I love to go to the gym. I love to share the message with people that I train. I know what it's done for me over the course of my life. And I know the benefit it's had for me both physically and mentally. So if all of a sudden somebody comes along and says, hey, you can take this thing and it's not gonna hurt you. It's gonna actually help you keep doing what you want to do. Then yeah, mark me down as curious. It's not only that these people were able to swim faster and harder. It's that they are able to recover quickly, which means they can do more of it. And if there is something that allowed me to go hard in the gym or in the pool or on my bike all the time, I'm really interested in learning more about it.
So, man, I'll throw the last question over to you to bring us home here as you talk about obviously being exercise junkie across a bunch of different formats. If the Enhanced Games had come to you and said, you get to compete, you get to do your own, participatory Hunter S. Thompson style journalism, which would you have picked?
Which protocol or which?
If they had said like, you get to hop in here.
Well, there were like kind of 5 broad domains that protocols. I think that one of the things that would help me most is EPO and the HGH and the steroids, which will help me recover faster so I could do it more. But I'd want to be in the pool. I mean, I was standing out there looking at that 50-meter pool. That's like it's called long course pool, and just completely jonesing, like wanting to get in.
Well, I bet when it was 97 degrees on the Vegas Strip, that probably helped too.
Yeah, and the pool was, competition 79 degrees. As a swimming purist, I have more of a beef with the fact that they let them use speed suits than I do with the dope. They just they said you can take the dope. It is what it is. But why speed suits too? Like they're not legal anymore. They haven't been legal since Beijing when they set all those records. My mom was an open water swimmer in the 1930s and 40s. And when I got into open water stuff in the 90s and got a wetsuit, she goofed on me. She's like, that's cheating. That helps you, that aids your buoyancy, keeps you warm. Just wear a wool suit and grease up with lanolin, you big sissy. So, I wouldn't have done it with a speed suit, but they didn't ask. Maybe they will.
Maybe next time. Maybe for the next Enhanced Games, we can actually get you out there and see how people always talk about that with the Olympics. Like, oh, we should have one regular person competing against these Olympic athletes. Maybe the next time around we can have man be out there.
I'll tell you what, if they started like a masters competition with this stuff, they would make a fortune, and that stock price would go right back up.
Take heed of that, Max Martin and all the folks at Enhanced. Well, Matt, thank you again for spending your Memorial Day weekend out there reporting it for us. There's going to be more stuff that'll be out on the website from his coverage, but it's been really interesting kind of exploring that intersection. So I appreciate you going out there for us. And that's going to do it for this week's episode of the podcast. Tune in next week when Bella will be bringing us an interview with one of our Women of Distinction honorees ahead of the ceremony, which will be next Wednesday, June 3rd. I'm Jack O'Brien, the executive editor. It's been a wonderful conversation, and we will see you next time. Take care. The MM+M podcast is produced by our editorial staff, Bella Jakowski, Lesha Bushek, Steve Madden, Jameson Fleming, and Jack O'Brien, with production and editing by Bill Fitzpatrick and Gordon Thaler. Listen to all episodes at mmm-online.com or wherever you get your podcasts.